Hello there and welcome again to our segments on doing business in the international arena. We're going to touch on the subject of doing business with companies in the UK, in Great Britain. And as an expert in your field and as a manager and an executive who travels the world, in this segment, we hope that you will be able to pick up on some tips and some information that will help you understand more deeply your counterparts in the UK. As you know very well, getting to know people is part of your business if you wish to succeed. And hopefully this introduction into how to understand your colleagues and indeed your future partners in the UK will help you tremendously. By the way, how are you going in terms of understanding other cultures? In the previous sessions, where we've talked in quite a lot of depth about understanding behaviours and understanding what makes people think, people from other countries, what makes them think, I do hope that you are progressing, and I do hope that you are finding out more ways as you by trial and error perhaps, meet other people and discuss and negotiate your business. So let's take a look at doing business with people from the UK, from Great Britain. In many other industrialised countries, in the last couple of decades or the last 20 years, there have been major restructurings going on. And certainly in Britain, this is also what has been happening. We find that in England, industry and the way business is done is moving away from the more traditional heavy engineering and primary sectors towards service and high-tech fields. That is to say that there are many more customers nowadays than there were in the past. And customers are wanting satisfaction. Customers are wanting great products and they're wanting expertise at the other end. That is, the people who are selling those products, they need to have great expertise in the service industry. So high-tech is certainly on the increase, as indeed it is here in Vietnam. And because of this shift and this process that is going on, it has also created a shift in the way that companies are managed and indeed in the way that companies are structured. Things are not what they used to be, as you are finding out in your own country here. Companies are now having to restructure and change the way they are doing their business and the way they are managing their business purely because of the business itself. So we can see that there is a lot of change going on. And particularly when we look at businesses and the way companies are structured, many of the hierarchy issues and class structuring issues, which used to be a major part of how industry in Britain ran, these have now started to be replaced by more modern business models. And it could be said that the US way of running businesses and the US business models are being followed more and more these days by companies in Great Britain, as we have found also by companies in Australia in our previous discussions. So we find that there have been great changes going on. Companies are not the traditional hierarchical companies that they used to be 20 years ago. Companies have to change, and their thinking has to change as well in the way that they manage people. It used to be that there were jobs for life, and people would join a company and they would feel safe in the prospect of being in that company for, let's say, 10, 20 years, or indeed until they retire and they receive a pension. But that idea of jobs for life has been overtaken now by the rapid change in work patterns and the rapid change in what's happening around the world in terms of job prospects. Things are not as easy as they used to be. We are living in a very fluid industry, a fluid society, and so change is ever present. So people are tuned in now, and companies are tuned in now to the prospect of human resources coming, staying, and moving on. We could say that now many British managers no longer expect to spend their whole careers with just one or two companies. Their thinking now is that their careers will involve perhaps 6 or 7 or even more companies during their working lifetime. And so therefore we see that they look towards a progression and moving from employer to employer. This kind of attitude towards employment in the past may have seemed an unhealthy one, but nowadays that's not the case. Indeed, in many countries, when executives work in a company, whether it be for 2 to 5 years, it seems that that is no longer a taboo subject. That is no longer seen as a negative towards that executive. That is seen more as a progressive, positive in terms of career movement and career path. So this progressive movement within industry, particularly in Britain, is perhaps a short-termism, we could say, associated with many of Britain's continental partners as well. We see it happening in Europe with businesses in the European Union, and we see it with UK companies. It's also seen in Australia, as I have mentioned, and also in the US. So this is a healthy thing. It can be very healthy and it can be very HR positive in terms of building great human resources. So here we also see in the British industry that there is less merit, less importance being placed on pure technical ability than in some countries as well. Some commentators have said that this tendency to move towards more generalized expertise rather than technical expertise is one of the reasons perhaps why manufacturing in the United Kingdom is not as strong as it used to be in the past. They say that this is the demise, this is the beginning of the end, we could say, of a great tradition of manufacturing that has existed in the UK over many, many, many decades. The last 3 decades particularly. So we find that we are looking at a more generalized way of doing industry, a more generalized approach to business in the UK as there was in the past. So business structures. How a business is structured and who is in the seat of power in the UK. This is very good to give you a basic understanding of what you need to look for, what you need to be aware of when you're going to be dealing with your British partners. In business structures in the UK, the board of directors is the real power broker of any company. All key decisions are made at this level. There's no doubt about that. So the board of directors holds the real power. And in public limited companies, for example, there must be at least 2 directors who are appointed by and who are accountable to the shareholders. The chairperson or the CEO leads this board of directors. So we find that the seat of power lies at that top level, at the board of directors level in these particular structures. Many of Britain's larger companies have non-executive directors who we say come in and they act as outside experts, outside advisors who are impartial, and they often provide links with government and the civil service. This usage of non-executive directors sometimes does cause some resentment by the executive directors. You have people who are seen as non-executive, and you have people who are seen as very executive. And so there can be a bit of a build-up of resentment. In Europe, the resentment doesn't seem to be as strong, and things run in parallel quite well. But in the UK, sometimes we can see that there is some resentment between the appointees who are non-executive, who are outside and who are impartial experts, so to speak. Even though in England structures have been traditionally hierarchical, we find now that there are many British firms who are moving towards a flatter structure in terms of their who is responsible to whom, etc. So the hierarchy is being flattened, and we are looking at a less bureaucratic approach. In other words, companies in the UK are trying to be progressive in their structures, as well as progressive in the way they manage their business. They realise that they have to change as well, and in the introduction to this segment, this is what it is all about in industry in the UK right now. People are moving forward. People are opening up to try to get rid of the hierarchy that existed for decades and move into a more flatter approach to how business is run and how business is managed. Sometimes, however, this has caused a blurring of the way things are done, the boundaries and the responsibilities of the staff involved in companies. And sometimes there are certain lacks of shape. Things are not as clear, things are not as specific, so it can be difficult to get a clear picture of the structure of a company sometimes. And this can lead to the employees being unclear as to exactly what they are doing. So right now we find that there is a move towards being progressive and flattening the hierarchy. However, in that process, sometimes the picture is not clear as to who does what, and it will take a while before things can be rectified and be on the way to providing really positive results. Sometimes job descriptions are a little bit vague and imprecise, and so the specific tasks that have to be undertaken by certain staff are not really known and are not well covered. I'm not saying this happens in every organisation, but this is the trend as UK companies try to move towards a more progressive management style and a business model that flattens the hierarchy. These things are not easy when you're coming from decades of strict and structured hierarchy in business and clear, definite models to follow, and then you're trying to change into more progressive business models. Of course, there will be times along the way when things are taking a different course and things need to be looked at quite closely to bring things back into perspective. But nevertheless, things are moving forward. Things are definitely moving forward, and when you do travel to the UK or when your business partners come here, keep an open mind as to how progressive the UK is now trying to be with its company structures. And if you keep this open mind, then you will find that you'll be able to work very well with your partners. As British companies try to move forward, of course, the management styles are being looked at more closely. And here we find, as we have mentioned before, that British managers now are tending more towards generalisation than specialisation. This means that the managers no longer have to be totally 100% specifically competent in certain areas. Of course, competency helps in being technical. It's important to know your stuff, but it's not necessary to have to know absolutely 100% of everything. This is what this means. So we see here that having pure academic qualifications is not a real big thing in the UK. The move towards a management style is now very much relevant experience. What is it that you know? What is your experience of dealing with this particular industry? How many years have you had experience in doing this particular kind of work and dealing with experts or technicians or people in this industry? The approach is very much a hands-on, practical approach. The qualifications you have are not that important anymore. Of course, they do have some level of importance, but it's not the major thing. Indeed, titles such as professor or doctor are rarely used outside the academic circles in the UK, and sometimes they can be seen as a sign of affectation, where it's not really regarded as the thing that you should be mentioning. People are more looking towards now your experience, your hands-on, your street-smart experience of doing the job, and how you actually approach the job. Being pragmatic, being practical, applying techniques, applying methods, and seeing the benefits of your experience are very much the way that British management likes to run these days. This is how they want to walk into the next few decades of doing business. So the emphasis, as I said, is on relevant experience. And definitely this is something quite the opposite when we look at the next two countries, Germany and France. In the UK today, much more emphasis, as I say, is placed on the man management skills needed to produce the best results from the team. And a manager is definitely required to have a good dose of interpersonal skills. These are the way that the manager relates to the other people in the team. 1-to-1, 1-to-2, 1-to-3, from the manager to the other team members. It's very important that the manager is able to speak and to say what he wants to say and have good relationships with his staff. To meld the team together, to hold it together. And this is the ability we call a fixer, which is highly regarded in UK management. Someone who can fix things, get things moving, guide the team, hold it together. This is really what teams need in the UK, rather than relying on the level of academic qualification that a team manager has. The manager has to have the ability to hold the team together, to be the fixer, to keep things moving and get things going. Modern managers, in the UK particularly, often want to appear as being able to nurture and cultivate a close and sometimes humorous, soft relationship with subordinates. Trying to bond with their team members is very, very important. Trying not to lay down the law too heavily is very, very important. So humour comes into things in the British management style, and having, we say, soft relationships with subordinates to maintain the teamwork, the team relationships that can bring results. This closeness, however, shouldn't be mistaken for being weak on the part of the boss or on the part of the manager. Of course, when difficult decisions need to be made, they will be made and they can be taken. This is the expertise and the hands-on practical approach and ability of the manager. So we find that in Britain, managers are softening up a little bit, but that doesn't mean they're not making hard and good decisions. So this is the tendency towards the style of management in the UK. Sometimes the British manager finds it difficult to be direct, and they tend to give instructions in a softer, more indirect way. They perhaps might like to ask assistance to get things done rather than to be explicit and lay down the law and be upfront and confrontational. So this way of approaching something, the way that they might talk about doing something and the different kind of language that they may use can be very confusing sometimes for those who are not British. And people may try to sort of work out what's going on here. You're using very nice language, but you're trying to give instructions. How can that work? How can you be flowery and soft with your language and yet try to get instructions followed? But this is the particular way that managers in the UK like to work, and their language is based this way. They find it difficult to be direct, upfront, confrontational with the language, and so it is softened. Points to remember when you're dealing with people from the UK. Most people, most managers will work this way. And then we come to the way that managers hold meetings. One thing that could be said about business meetings with companies from the UK is that there are frequent meetings. Frequent meetings held perhaps not too long, but frequent meetings held with their counterparts or internally that sometimes are not very conclusive. The decision may not be made, it means, at that particular meeting. It could be that another decision may be made later on at a following meeting. So don't expect that all your decisions that you want to make will be made at the one meeting. Sometimes the meetings are held and lots of discussion is continued later on. Even though the frequency of the meetings is there and the decisions may not be made, it could open up a lot of discussion that needs to be had on a certain subject. But sometimes British managers themselves and British staff say that there are too many meetings, and the length of the meetings, they do tend to complain about those as well. In comparison with other countries and other cultures too, sometimes there is not a lot of preparation done in the meetings, except though when there are client issues and particular client meetings and service issues that need to be solved. So internally, when you talk about meetings in British companies, be prepared for the fact that there are going to be a lot of meetings and a lot of talking, and sometimes there's no result at the end of that meeting. So you may like to actually counter that and try to push forward for a little bit of more conclusive results to come from meetings when you're dealing with your counterparts. So just be open to this fact that does happen sometimes. I suppose the reason that this does happen is, just like in Australia, there is a lot of need to openly discuss things, and sometimes meetings are viewed by those attending as a forum, as a place where they can air their views and where they can openly debate an issue, and where some kind of structure or some kind of pathway or solution can be found from that open discussion. So this is part of the culture. And when perhaps the pathway or the route is agreed, then the detailed work schedule can be implemented after that particular point. So a lot of discussion goes on first, and then they find the pathway or the structure or the plan that they have to follow in order to get the results. Being over-prepared in the UK can sometimes have negative feelings towards those who have prepared in advance. Perhaps people resent the fact that somebody might have prepared a lot and they might stand out, or they might be seen as being a little bit more superior perhaps to others in a meeting. So sometimes just be prepared for that. The same applies in Australia, where one person doesn't really want to be seen to be superior to anybody else. So this kind of tendency exists in the culture. Agendas will be followed loosely. They will be prepared, but a lot of the times they will be produced and will be followed loosely. However, if something does also come up during the meeting, it cannot be excluded if it's considered that it should be discussed. So an agenda will be followed, but not so strictly. If something else comes up, it will be added if it's found that it needs to be talked about, that it needs to be debated. So it's quite flexible. This flexibility can be something that you can work with rather than thinking of that as a negative. So the main thing is, if you are having dealings with your UK counterparts in business meetings, openly discuss and debate. It's very well received. So please give your contribution to the meeting. Also, the British like to be punctual. They like to consider that they get there on time. It's fairly common, though, for people to arrive a little bit late, but they never really arrive very, very late. So that is an allowance. Again, a little bit of flexibility there. But if you are doing business, there's always one rule to follow, and that is be on time, regardless of the other culture. Always try to be on time, because that is something that can never go wrong. And you look as though you are always professional and always prepared. So we have meetings in UK companies. How people run their meetings are more flexible, so be open to that and be ready to contribute. Again, how do people from the UK, how do managers in British companies view teamwork? The British, they like decisions to be made in a team environment. And you will find that when you're dealing with project teams or service teams or whatever the team may be, you will find that a good manager will always try to use his interpersonal skills to ensure buy-in. That means to ensure acknowledgement, acceptance, and buy-in from the team, from every member of the team. Now, normally, the team environment will try to be very friendly, and people will move to try to get along with other individuals in the team and to be supportive and helpful. This is quite the norm. Where you come from business meetings that are structured around open debate, it means that the move towards the team environment is quite a fluid thing. People like to get along, they like to work together, they like to have companions in the team as well, and to support other members of the team. This is a known thing. People in teams know that if they can support their colleagues, they know that things will move along and progress much, much better. If, however, something does go wrong, it's not uncommon for team members to sort of blame somebody or point the finger at somebody else in the team. This is something that is quite a bit of a twist, but this is the nature of how things develop. Blame culture is something that does exist in working life, in professional life, and sometimes in many organizations they are trying to change this mentality. They are trying very hard to change this mentality because, as you and I know, blame culture is a very negative culture. So, this does exist, and there are moves to try to change it. And indeed, in your own culture, blame culture should not exist. As a manager, the idea is to find solutions rather than to lay blame unduly and unnecessarily. Laying blame can have a very negative impact on the team. So blame culture, companies, and organizations are trying to change that mentality. In teams, of course, you have your experts, you have people who specialize. But in the UK, teams are trying to not make that happen specifically. Every team member is a specialist and a technical professional. They are trying to take a more generalist view of projects and the way that each team member's role is played in that project. It may be that to be seen as a good all-rounder, someone with skills in many different areas, is something that is viewed as a very positive role in a team. Of course, you would have people who have certain levels of expertise, and that is a necessary thing. But it's also important that those specialists have areas of expertise in other particular roles as well. So this is something that is viewed as a positive thing. And this is where you find that team members in the UK are very supportive, because if they can support other roles in other ways with their multitasking or with their other generalist abilities, then this makes for a much happier team and a more productive team. So we can see that British teams are very much a happy environment, a supportive environment. If you are being involved with those teams, join in and add your bit of flavour, add the way that you wish to work to make it a very positive experience. Communicating, as we have seen across cultures, can be quite difficult, and you as a manager, as an executive, coming from Vietnam and working with your UK counterparts, you need to understand most definitely how people communicate. To be able to have your meetings, to be able to know the business structures, and indeed to be able to know how to work with British teams, you have to be able to know what the general communication styles are. As I mentioned before, we know that the British are quite soft in their language. And when I said soft, I'd just like to explain a little bit more what that does actually mean. They are in some ways, the British are in some ways almost Asian in the way that they use their language in a very diplomatic method. Perhaps they are alone in the way that they communicate compared to their European counterparts. And the British strongly place diplomacy before directness in communication. Actually, in communication in life as well as in the business sense. And not wanting to be confrontational in business situations, the British see directness with open confrontation, and they see this as being very blunt, and that will offend the other party. So we can say that the British prefer to soften the approach to the way they manage and communicate, because they fear that the bluntness and a confronting kind of language will offend the other party. So here we see that the British can often seem to be evasive, that they don't want to come around to the point in meeting situations. They can appear that way because they are searching for a way of saying something negative in a positive way. They are looking for the words. They are looking for the way or the approach in order to soften what they want to say, so it doesn't appear too hard and too direct. Anything negative that they want to say, they do want to say it in a positive way, of course. They know what the outcomes must be, but they will use different tactics and different approaches to say those negative things. As well as being very diplomatic, and as well as the British using their language in a very soft way, they would like to use more acceptable and more positive phrases. For example, instead of saying, "I disagree," I mean, that to you and I, that may be quite okay to say, but sometimes to another culture, particularly the United Kingdom, instead of saying, "I disagree," they might bring it out as saying, "I think you have made several excellent points there, but have you ever considered such and such and such and such and such and such?" So here you can see that this is an example of being diplomatic in their language rather than being direct and confrontational. This is just the way they are. And quite often it's a very pleasant experience sometimes to be in a conversation like this. So long as the point is not confused and the point is not missed and it comes back to the point that needs to be discussed. And sometimes we can see that for your UK counterparts, if there's a lack of interest in what you are saying, they may not say, oh, I'm not interested in that. They may say, that's an interesting point. But actually you will get the feeling that they have a lack of interest in that idea. So, it comes with your experience and the amount of times you converse and you discuss with your counterparts how you get to know the way they communicate. And you will pick up on this. You will get a feeling. You have common sense. So learn to be open to the fact that there is a lot of diplomacy in the language dealing with UK counterparts. You will also notice that in your conversations there will be humour as well. It comes across in most business situations. People are very open and they like to have a bit of fun and to joke around. And it does make the whole process, the whole communication process, much more pleasant, so long as the major point and the goals are kept in focus. And, you will find that the more tense and difficult sometimes a situation comes, someone will come up with a joke and they will try to use humour to diffuse tensions that are building up. It is the way of the culture to have a laugh and try to open up discussions to diffuse very tense and critical situations. Of course, this does not lessen the intent or the thought about those situations, but it's just a way to approach that situation. Of course, the British are taking you seriously. They will take you deadly seriously, but it's the culture and the way they handle the situation that can be used as a tension release mechanism to keep situations calm. To keep situations calm and reserved and not emotional, this is the pathway to progress and bring about positive outcomes. Never really underestimate your British counterparts when they are using humour. It may seem to you that they're using it in an inappropriate way. It may seem to you that way, but it may not seem to them to be that way. So be open, all right, and just be mindful of the fact that that's how they are dealing with the situation. So try to either go with the flow and be open and give your input and see how you can come about with a positive outcome. Humour is very important, as I have highlighted here. It's very important and it's a respected communication tool. So if you can bring a little bit of humour to the situation, then that's great. You are going to contribute your side and that will be warmly welcomed. I guarantee it. So be prepared for that. As I mentioned in some other cultures, it is better to be self-depreciating rather than self-promoting. Not to speak of yourself more, but to be a little bit more humble about your abilities and your qualifications when you're dealing with people from the UK. People who are really verbally outspoken and positive about themselves and their abilities may tend to be a little bit criticised or disbelieved by their counterparts. And people will see that as being a little bit too up themselves, we say, or being too superior, talking about yourself too much. It's the same, it goes for Australians. Don't try to stand out as being the best person in the team. Be a part of that team. Be on equal levels for the most part. this kind of communication style in the UK, this is where it's at. So be more self-depreciating and try to go with the flow of your British counterparts in your communication styles. You will find that they will be very, very warm and very, very acceptable if you can use also a little bit of humour and become part of the team in that respect. Of course, in business, women in business. This is one area that we are taking a look at in all of the countries that we do cover. And we can see that more and more and more, of course, women are making up a very large percentage of the workforce in many, many countries. So as you travel abroad, indeed to Australia and to the US, as we have touched upon, and now to the UK, you will find that women are a large percentage of the workforce. Almost 50%, we could say. However, we do find that a lot of women are in the lower paid part-time jobs as well, generally speaking in the UK. But statistics show that women are on the whole still paid less for performing the same tasks as male colleagues in the UK. So this is something that has to be changed, that is changing, and that will take some years to improve. But we do find that even though these statistics do exist, women are becoming more frequently moved into managerial positions than in most other European countries. And more women are reaching the very highest levels in British business life. We can see very, very prominent women in major firms around the UK now, and indeed in government and in society. There are many powerful women in positions of responsibility. More female managers are found in high-tech industries than in more traditional engineering sectors. And this is due to the fact that a small number of women in the UK graduate with technical degrees. So we find that women are moving more into management. Women are moving into more positions of executive power than into technical expertise. So there we see a trend, and you will find that you will be meeting women in managerial positions more so when you do travel and deal with businesses in the UK. Indeed, there are British companies here in Vietnam where women are holding senior positions too. So this is a trend, and this is part of the culture and part of the way business is going for British companies and women in business in the UK. Dressing, of course, we need to touch upon this. And as in Australia, traditional dark grey and dark blue suits tend to dominate. Suits are worn, and if you want to be a little bit more specific, crisp white shirts and just normal conventional ties. This is the traditional look. In more senior circles, sometimes you will see men wearing cufflinks. Not the norm in many, many countries, but you are looking at businesses in the UK, and the dress code from the UK is a very traditional, very correct, sometimes very proper dress code. The women will often mirror or resemble the way that the men dress. Dark suits and blouses with little flamboyant sort of accessories being used. Minimalization in office decor is the go now, and also minimalization in the way people dress as well, particularly in management positions. You will see that less jewelry, less flowery, less colourful accessories are the way to go. So less is best, and it's very professional. The look is very businesslike and very professional. Sometimes in companies, however, there's a little bit of a dress-down policy which allows employees to wear what we call smart casual. You will find that in IT companies, perhaps if you walk into a large firm, people will be dressed down, and if there are no clients to be met, and you will find that smart casual is what people are wearing in offices. It's a little bit difficult to define and describe smart casual. It is a little bit conservative. It could mean an open neck shirt, short sleeves with nice trousers. That's smart casual. It could mean a nice blouse with a woman wearing a skirt or a pair of trousers. Smart casual could also mean very nice jeans, new jeans, not tatty or old jeans, but a good shirt, smart jeans, and closed-in shoes. That could be smart casual. So you find that there is a little bit of proper dressing, more formal, professional, business-like dressing, plus smart casual dressing, which is still a little bit conservative. In the UK, if you're travelling there, be prepared. It can be very rainy. It's always good to carry a raincoat and maybe an umbrella if you're going there. They're just some pointers that you should remember. Of course, the UK's weather is never ever sunshine all the time. If you're travelling to Australia, that's a different thing, and some places in the US, of course. But UK or London tends to be very grey most of the time. So just be aware of that. So your dress code is important. Try to be knowledgeable of it. Try to be mindful of how people dress, and you sort of go with the flow. You would dress appropriately as well. It's a sign of respect. It's an opener. People will welcome you. Of course, they will understand if you're not exactly dressed like them. I'm not saying that. But the thing is to be mindful. If you can dress appropriately and you know what the code is, then that means you've done a little bit of preparation and a little bit of planning before, and that looks good for you. It looks good for whatever business you're trying to undertake with your UK counterpart. All right, so let's take a look now at some tips. At the end of each session on our countries, previously Australia and also the USA, we rounded up our segment with some tips, and let's go through them one by one so you might be able to refresh your memory. So, tip number 1, remember, British companies tend to develop managers to be generalists rather than specialists. So therefore, managers do have a view on a broad range of things concerning their tasks and their jobs. Concerning their topic areas, they would have a wide number of views on that particular topic. So they're more generalists, but they do understand what they're talking about. Tip number 2. There has been a change in working patterns in recent years, as I said, and so you will find that people frequently move from company to company. So therefore, if you are involved with a partner from the UK, don't be surprised if you see that some of your colleagues in a couple of years or 2 or 3 years perhaps may move on, and they are not sort of going to be on a particular project or in that position forever. This is the trend. So be open to this and be mindful that, and don't be shocked that people are moving on. This is a change that has happened. It's quite frequent. Tip number 3. British companies are using different business models now, and they have moved away from a lot of hierarchy. That means 10 different levels to go through to get things done. So they are flattening the hierarchy, we could say. And in this situation, many layers of management have been removed. So they're trying to make things more simple and more progressive. If you are coming from a company that has a lot of hierarchy involved, then you're going to have to be open a little bit more and see how your British counterparts are able to get the work done with less levels of hierarchy. Perhaps it's something that you may need to look at yourself. Your British counterparts may find it a bit difficult to deal with your company if you have 10 or 12 levels where they would ideally think you need to have about 4 or 5 levels in your hierarchy. So be open to this and be mindful of it. Tip number 4. In the UK, because people are changing the business models and sometimes there are more generous views, job descriptions can be a little bit unclear and imprecise. So tasks and decision-making, getting tasks completed and decision-making can be a bit of a stumbling block. But this will change as things progress. So when you are dealing with your counterparts, be mindful and try to make sure that people understand their roles and what is expected, etc., of them in their particular projects. Tip number 5, managers, yes, they try to have close, friendly relationships with their staff in their team. And they like to be seen as part of the team, very much similar to the Australian way of doing things. So teamwork is important. Having the qualification, the academic qualification, that is respected. However, respect is earned more so through experience rather than the qualification. So you would not see very often a professor or a doctor as being in the senior management committee of a large company. In the UK, your work experience, your practical application experience is far more respected in some ways than your academic qualification. This is the viewing and the culture, the way people are thinking. Tip number 7, managers sometimes find it difficult, as I said, to be direct with instructions, and they use very diplomatic language. Soft language, a flowery language, is the way that they come in to soften hard approaches. Tip number 8, meetings, there are a lot of them, they're frequent, and sometimes they don't produce the desired decision. However, meetings are forums for debate, and that is a good thing in itself as well. The British, as in tip number 9, they do less preparations for meetings, as a lot of other nationalities might do, but as I said, it is a forum, as in Australia, mostly for debating potential solutions. So don't feel that it is a waste of time. And in your input, you can also bring the meeting back to its goal if you feel things are going off center a little bit. But this is a great thing too, discussing and debating, as you well know. If you can bring some solutions, then that is a very, very good thing. Tip number 10. Meetings are reasonably structured and kept to a formal kind of structure, but sometimes the agenda is thrown out the window and the time is not so formally followed. But that doesn't mean things can't be seen as results, all right? But just be prepared for that. Tip number 11. As I said, team managers like to be seen as part of the team, and they like the team to have a companionable atmosphere, meaning the atmosphere has to be very comfortable and supportive of what's going on. Team members are also, tip number 12, expected to take a very overall interest in the project. Rather than confining themselves to their task and their role and completing that, it's expected that people join in and help out and look at it as the big picture, an overall view, and be supportive in an overall way. As I said, the language, tip number 13, the British place diplomacy much, much firmly before directness. And they don't like to have negative emotions in a meeting. Generally, they don't like that. All right. So if you want to be direct, okay, be direct, but be direct in a very positive way, in a diplomatic way, to help your British counterparts come to discuss things well and get some positive outcomes. Tip number 14. Sometimes, and this is because the British like indirect approaches with their language, sometimes the British will misinterpret your direct speech as being perhaps a little bit rude or aggressive or arrogant. So one thing to remember, try to soften your speech perhaps and come halfway when you are discussing and communicating with your British counterpart. Tip number 15. Humour is there. So if you have a sense of humour, and I am sure that you do, bring it into the equation or the conversation at some points during your communication. It's not seen as unprofessional. So it is acceptable, that means. So don't mind using it in the right way, and it can open doors to a lot of things you can do together with your UK counterparts. Tip number 16. It's better not to be so high up and stuck up and self-promotional. Be positive about your company and your products, of course. That's important, and that's a given. But don't do so much that about yourself and your abilities above all else. Tip number 17. Small talk is there at the beginning of meetings. It's a good way to start the meeting, and indeed that is in lots of ways how you start your meetings. And it can break the ice. It can be seen as a very harmonious thing. So open with small talk, very acceptable, very warming to a successful meeting. Tip number 18. Women are playing an increasingly prominent role in management. So you will find women there. Whenever you're dealing in senior places now, you will find that there will be women in management and responsible positions of management as well. Tip 19. Be mindful of the dress code, as I said, and also formal dress is really still predominant. Things are starting to change, but if you are not sure, always go in a suit. Always go well dressed. That will get you there. That will open up the door, and you will not feel that you have done anything that is not appropriate. And tip number 20. In the UK, people use first names usually amongst themselves. So don't be afraid to use first names. If you use surnames, it might seem that you are distancing yourself, that you are being too formal, and it's not so friendly. So colleagues always use first names. So if you're working in a project team, or if you're having a meeting and you've met each other and now you're starting to have lots of conversations and meetings, use first names. It's very acceptable and it's very warming, and people like that. All right, so don't be too formal. Use first names rather than the surnames. Finally, we come to entertaining. And in England, entertaining is always there, of course, as in many places where you do business. And we can say that actually in the UK, lunch is the way to do business. You find that you will not really be going out for dinner. Business lunches are seen more as an extension of the meeting, and it's quite acceptable to discuss business matters over food. Follow the lead of your host if you're not sure. The person who invites you will be the person who will be paying, and there's no real need for you to offer to pay for the cost. It's understood that the person who invites you will make that payment. If you have an invited guest and they offer to contribute, they will probably do so out of politeness, but they will not be expected to be taken up on their offer. So don't worry about that. Usually the host will pay for the meal. Lunches can be very many different styles of lunches. You will find that in the UK people are very formal sometimes and very informal and casual. So lunch can vary in style from an informal pub lunch to a more elaborate meal at an expensive restaurant or at a club. The choice of venue, the choice of the restaurant, can depend on the location and the importance of the business opportunity or the market that you're involved in. So if you, for example, if you're unsure where to take somebody, it's best to go to a good quality restaurant. Don't just jump right in and say, oh, let's have a pub lunch. Okay, the best rule to follow, which will help you all the time and get you out of trouble, is to go to a good quality restaurant. That's the safest bet. What is served at lunch? Well, alcohol is usually offered at lunch. And some people will accept, and some people perhaps will prefer to stick to soft drinks. It's actually a personal decision. There's no hard and fast rule here, and you will not be under pressure to drink alcohol. But indeed, if you want to have a drink, want to have a beer or a wine, that's fine too. So it's much more friendly and very, very open, and you can say, yes, I'll have a drink, or no, I'll just have a soft drink. That's quite fine. For large amounts of drinking, that's normally done at dinner when the work day is finished. But lunchtime, 1 or 2 glasses is fine. Drinking at dinner, on these occasions, you may find that you are under a little bit of pressure to join in, because that is the normal culture, the normal way that people will relax and get on with things because the workday is finished. So you might find that you're under a bit of pressure to join in there. So you deal with that how you feel best, 1 or 2, and then you can just say, look, yeah, I'll have just slowly, I'll have a few drinks with you. That's up to you. It depends on the relationships you've developed. But nobody will force you, okay? You just be yourself and join in the fun. That's the most important thing. At restaurants, most restaurants will add a service charge to the bill automatically. But it is still customary to add a 10% tip on top of that to the waiter. This is the way things go. So if you're in London or anywhere in the UK, remember that little point. You might be frowned upon if you forget that. This is the nature of things and the tipping culture. So, in our roundup, going to the UK, there are a lot of things to remember. The way things are structured, the companies, the way they're structured, the management styles, the meeting styles, the way your British counterparts will communicate with you, the way they will dress and the way they will hold meetings with their teams, and the way they entertain. All in all, a very sort of diplomatic and indirect sort of way of dealing with people in communication. And I do hope that when you do travel there, or indeed when you have your business partners from the UK come here, that you remember to meet halfway, try to be open-minded, and consider the other side as well as yourself in trying to reach possible solutions together. See how you go, and I do hope that you will be able to enjoy the business that you are doing, and some of the tips that you have picked up on in this particular segment on doing business with your British counterparts will help you tremendously. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in our next session. Goodbye.